So we're going to kind of start with some exciting things coming up, and we're also going to talk about like how sugar works in your brain, and then we're going to kind of talk about the holidays and Halloween specifically, and then we're going to go into some specific swaps and mindsets and that sort of thing. So if you guys have questions while I'm talking, please don't hesitate to unmute and let me know. Okay. So first of all, we have some really exciting things coming up. So the number one thing is that we are changing the time. So we are going to start meeting at 5 p.m. EST, which I think is going to be a lot better for people. So if you're watching the replay, let us know below if that's going to work for you. But we took a poll and it seemed like the biggest thing wasn't the day, it was the time. So we will continue to play with this until we figure out if it's the day, if it's the time, if it's the day and the time. But for now, we're going to keep it on Tuesdays at 5 p.m. EST. So hopefully that'll work a little bit better. And then coming up, we have a really fun challenge, November 8th to the 12th. So it is a 5-day rewire your brain challenge. So it's actually going to pair really nicely with what we're talking about today with sugar and treats. And so in November, we're going to do 5 days to beat the sugar addiction and clear brain fog for good. So we're really excited about that. We're going to have really, it's a real short pop-up Facebook group that you guys are going to have free access to. And we're going to give you really targeted trainings with specific, easy to incorporate action steps. So if today you're kind of like, ooh, I really need to get on the ditching the sugar bandwagon, well, stay tuned because we're going to give you everything you possibly need in that challenge. And it's going to be really, really fun. Then we're going to dig more deeply into those topics in November. So for example, the reason that we want to go sugar-free, the reason that we want to change our diet is because we experience bloating, we experience fatigue, we experience brain fog. And so we're going to take each one of those topics in November and we're going to specifically deep dive on those and talk about what may help for those individual symptoms. So any questions about that, just let us know. And if you're watching the replay, we want to make sure that we welcome our newest member, Allie. So congratulations, Allie. We're super excited to have you here. So one thing that we want to make sure that you know is that we are here for you and your questions. So if you have questions when you watch a video, just drop comments below, or in the middle of the week, you can just share in the Facebook group. So we're happy you're here. Okay. So today is all about Halloween and sugar and navigating the holiday season that's about to kick off. It's about 3 months. And so I wanted to start with these quotes from Dr. Mark Hyman because I really like the way he talks about sugar and the brain, and he does it in very succinct, clear ways. So the one on the left says, being addicted to sugar is a biological disorder driven by hormones and neurotransmitters that fuel sugar and carb cravings, leading to uncontrolled overeating. So what he's talking about is this cycle that one fuels the other, and it ends up, you just can't stop eating it. It just keeps triggering your brain to want more. We're going to talk about why that happens. Many patients tell me once they dive into a box of chips or cookies, they literally can't stop eating. Have you ever wondered why you would devour a box of cookies, but you wouldn't binge on wild salmon? The reason isn't because you lack self-discipline and are weak-willed. You are not emotionally weak or lazy. You are biologically addicted to sugar, and willpower doesn't work here. That is such an important takeaway because what I see happen over and over and over again is that we just feel so guilty and we feel like, well, we don't have enough self-control and we just need to eliminate harder and we need to do this and we need to do that. And it's all about what a bad person you are and how little self-control you are and all this kind of stuff. And it has nothing to do with willpower. It has nothing to do with self-control. It has to do with, at this point, you are fighting against your biology. So we're going to talk about why that is. So let's talk about the biology of sugar addiction. So really, pretty much all addictions are the same in terms of how they work with your brain. But they may be a little bit more different in terms of like how you handle them or how you respond to them. So we're going to specifically talk about sugar, but this it always starts with a trigger, right? So triggers might be different for different people. For one person, it might be actually eating one thing. And then all of a sudden, I had one Oreo. That means I'm going to have, the entire sleeve of Oreos. And that one bite was the trigger. For some people, it might be a social situation. For some people, it might be the smell of a certain food. A lot of times for our brain, it is actually eating that food, having that sugar on our tongue ends up being a trigger. So then a lot of times that trigger will lead to a binge. And again, this isn't always a self-control issue. This is primarily not a self-control issue. This is how the brain works, because once you ingest that food, you get a dopamine hit and your brain likes this. And so when you eat things like sugar, it actually works on the opiate receptors of your brain, and it triggers you to want more of that food. It triggers your appetite for that food. And then, of course, we also know that the more that we eat sugary, sweetened, highly processed foods, it changes our palate, it changes our taste, right? So, we get that trigger, then we have to have all of it because of the way that our brain is working, and then compound that with a deprivation mindset. And you think, well, I can't have this tomorrow, so I have to have all of it today. I can't just have 2 bites. And you have the high palatability, the high sugar, the high dopamine hits, and you're kind of stuck here. It's very, very difficult to kind of get out of this loop at that point. So then, of course, you binge. You have the entire pack of Oreos, or in my case, you have the entire box of Teddy Grahams or whatever it is. And that probably leads to some guilt and shame. Well, okay, I'm not going to eat it tomorrow. I can't have a single piece because that's obviously my trigger. I can't do this. I can't do that. So then you purge for a while and you're like, okay, I'm only going to eat 1,200 calories a day. I'm never going to have ice cream. I'm never going to have a stick of sugar. I'm not going to have anything. I can't have cookies. I can't have this. I can't have that. And then, of course, that never lasts. You go into total deprivation mode, and then you get triggered again and you start the cycle. So it's very, very, very similar to any other cycle of addiction. But the difference is with food, with sugar, generally you can just remove the trigger. Generally, that is the trigger. Now, if it is environmental and emotional, like if it is a trauma response, for example, like overeating in general, not specifically like a sugar trigger, but like overeating because it's like a comfort thing, that obviously has some emotional trauma, mental health aspects that need to be dealt with separately. And that's very, very important. But for a lot of us, it's literally just a trigger of putting that food in our mouth, and then the signals that it sends our brain that then sends to the rest of our body. It messes up our hunger signals. It messes up our full signals. It changes the chemical signaling across our body. And that's why we see this pattern. Whoops. So I wanted to just make sure that we talked about this, because we want to, first of all, understand our biology better, right? That's really important. It helps us to kind of know what's going on and to realize why we get into certain patterns, but then also know that it's something that we can absolutely hack in our body, and so that we don't have to be so triggered every single time. Do you have any questions about this particular slide or this particular process at all? Okay. All right, cool. We'll continue on. So, speaking about Halloween in particular, although you could probably apply most of this to, the holidays in general, some of the pitfalls that we run into is not having a plan. So, because we don't have a plan, everything is negotiable. And when something is negotiable, and we're tempted to do something, then we'll probably do it. The other pitfall is quite obvious. Sugar is everywhere from Halloween to January 1st. Pretty much you are just bombarded with sugar options everywhere. We don't have backups. So we get in that deprivation mode, and we're going to talk about that as we go through the call tonight. And then we get these all or nothing mindsets, which you kind of talked about earlier. So we're going to go through all of those and make sure that we have a solution for each one. So for Halloween, we want to be aware of the impact on our brain, which is kind of what we just talked about, that triggering cycle, right? So sugar and gluten, you've heard us talk about gluten a lot, and now we're focusing on sugar, but they basically do the same thing. They act on the brain opiate receptors. They cause more cravings. They stimulate our appetite. They change our palate to desire sweeter and sweeter things. They encourage fat storage, and they impact mood and digestion. So we just know that these foods create this cascade of things that we don't want to happen in our body. We also know like that eating a lot of sweet things can change our palate to want more, and not eating sweet things, our palate will readjust. So if you've ever done like a 7 day, never have any sugar, not even in like condiments or anything like that, you'll notice that all of a sudden almonds taste really sweet. There's a sweetness to them. It's fascinating. All of a sudden fruit tastes like dessert. So yes, your palate can change to desire sweeter and sweeter. If you're stuck in this sugary cycle, you can shift it back. And then you can be satisfied with other things. And we're going to talk about that. So, with sugar everywhere and Halloween in particular, here are some tips if you have kids, and here's some tips if you're a grown up. So, for kids, some ideas would be if they really want to collect candy, and that's a thing that you guys do for Halloween, which I mean, most people do, right? Let them collect the candy. It's part of just the experience, and it's fun to dress up, and it's fun to do that. But what we did was throw away candy with gluten or non-negotiables. So like if your kid has a peanut allergy, you're going to throw that away, right? If you have a dairy allergy, you're going to throw that away, right? Same thing with gluten in my family. We were like, okay, dump it out. If there's something with gluten in it, we're going to get rid of it. We also had a boundary of like 1 to 2 pieces of candy a day. So however you want to, set that boundary and limit. So you're enjoying it, but we are putting some restrictions on it, right? And this is sort of like, this is not what I'm going to recommend. This is not how I would do it like as a grown-up person, but like, kids that want to experience the holiday, and if this works for you, it works for you. Some other people will replace candy with money or activities or other desirable things. So you go out, you have the experience, you gather some candy, and then you get paid for it. And some people like that and some people don't. So again, it's kind of up to whatever works for you guys, but those are just some ideas. So tips for grown-ups, right? We want to plan ahead. We're certainly not going to go out with a pillowcase and gather like 5 pounds of candy. So we're not stuck in that problem anymore. But we do go to the office, or we go to the grocery store, or we have parties, or we go to a party, or we have people over, whatever it is. And suddenly we're surrounded by all of these things. So we want to make sure that we have negotiables and non-negotiables, and we choose what you will hand out or what you will accept if you're participating in trick-or-treating. So like if you are, and everybody's gonna be a little different. So if you are really strict about something in your house, are you going to pass out something that you don't agree with? I mean, it just depends on your perspective, right? Some people will, some people won't. But if you have extras, one thing that works regardless of whatever you're passing out is to just throw them away, or give them to the last kid, make them super happy, or take it to work, or do something. But one of the best things is to just not have this stuff in your house. Because if you have it in your house, I don't know about you, but I would find it, I think that would be a much more difficult situation to handle. So just don't have it in the house. And instead have swaps at home. So if you are out and you come home, or you're around all this stuff and you're tempted or whatever, like you don't want to get into the deprivation mindset where you don't have a replacement of some kind. So I've mentioned this a couple times, negotiables versus non-negotiables. But this is so important in everything we do. This is how we go out to eat. This is how we handle social situations. This is how we handle parties. This is how we handle holidays. You have to decide in your health goals what is and is not non-negotiable and what's negotiable. So you have to always have a why with that, or else, like I said earlier, when it gets a little rough, if it's negotiable, it'll go in the garbage. So, well, I'll just give you an example. You go over to your Aunt Sue's house, and she always has this upside down pineapple cake, and it's your favorite thing in the whole world. But recently you found out that you have a major gluten sensitivity, and that's what was causing all of your migraines and your bloating, and you've given it up, right? Well, her handing you that is a very emotional thing. You really like it. Maybe you don't have a deep relationship with her, so you haven't explained everything that's going on, right? So you really have to kind of plan ahead and have a why of like how you're going to handle these situations, and be able to explain, hey, this is something I'm doing, and this is why. And your why has to motivate you enough to actually say no and to follow through with it. So some examples of my non-negotiables, no matter where I am, is I won't have gluten. You can't pay me $1 million to have gluten. I just won't do it. Dairy is something that depends on the situation. And sugar is really if I'm out. So I don't have sugar for example, like I don't even have a bag of sugar in my house. Okay. But if we are going out and they happen to have a gluten-free dessert, I will have that dessert. Okay. So that's a very, I've cut back my consumption of sugar massively by, doing that. Does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions about anything? I see some comments in the chat here. Yeah, shame doesn't work. Yeah, no. We have the same negotiables and non-negotiables, Sophie. Yeah.
I agree. I think I have the same ones too.
Cool. Yeah.
But
Yeah. Because this is really like how it's I feel like this is very doable out in the real world at this point. In terms of being able to navigate any situation with these negotiables and non-negotiables. So one of the things that is really important is to be aware of not having backups. When you're making these changes, you really do not want to get into the deprivation or diet mentality. So people, might argue, oh, well, giving up gluten is a diet or whatever. I don't think so. I think it's giving up a poison, but your brain does not like 100% deprivation. So if you say, I can never have a cookie again, I can never have ice cream again, I can never have a brownie again, it just won't work well. You tell yourself you can't have something and you want that thing. So your brain can handle replacements and swaps, but it can't handle deprivation. So if you're surrounded by sugar and you tell yourself, I'm never going to have it, I'm never going to have it, I'm never going to have it, you'll probably do well for a period of time and then binge, like we talked about earlier. That's just the way the brain is going to work. So instead of that, we can sort of hack that process by satisfying those cravings, but without the brain trap. It's not going to stimulate the brain anymore. And we've talked about that a lot in a lot of our trainings, how we make these swaps. But again, we want to be really careful about all or nothing mindsets. So instead of all or nothing, what if we bring our own treats to the office? We don't keep sugar in the house. We have dessert out, but we don't bring back leftovers. We make brownies or cookies and freeze them for cravings. So for example, there's black bean brownies or chickpea brownies or almond flour brownies or almond butter brownies. There's so many different ways. So identifying like what your craving is, what your favorite thing is, and then having that as a backup. Keeping some at work, keeping some at home, keeping them in the freezer. So if you're somebody that even though it's healthy and it might not trigger the brain the same way, seeing it on the counter may be a trigger for you, keep it in the freezer. And then, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm about to have my period in 3 days. I need a chocolate fix. Boom, you can thaw that right out. And again, the reason we're talking about swaps and shifting the ingredients is because when you shift to a dessert that is protein and fat heavy, and then it changes the sugar to be like honey or maple syrup or dates or coconut sugar, those types of desserts that we're talking about swapping, they don't trigger your brain the same way. So very often you're actually satisfied with that one piece because it hasn't started that chemical cascade that says, well, I need to have 5 of these then, because you don't have the appetite stimulation. You don't have the same sort of brain chemical releases. So you're still getting that sweet fix. You still get the sensation of satisfying that craving, but not all the negative stuff. So maybe, what if instead you keep a chocolate bar or some, favorite, I talk about who a lot around for, after dinner. That's one of the things I like to do is after a meal, have like a square of my who chocolate. So we want to make sure that we don't go into like this diet mentality because often that doesn't work. So I thought what would be fun is to go over some specific swaps for Halloween. And not all of these are going to be perfect in terms of what I just talked about being like protein, fat, working the best way for our biology, but these are going to be upgrades. So we're going to talk about them. I thought this map was really interesting because basically what you're seeing is like Snickers, Reese's, and M&Ms, which I mean, like, I don't know about you guys. Like, are those your favorites? Like, I would have to say those are probably top 3. Yeah. Yeah. Like, I mean, I'm not, Swedish fish.
Snickers Reese. Yeah. I'm not a Red Hots kind of person. Maybe a Milk Dud,
Yeah. Yeah. So Snickers, M&Ms, Reese's, those are pretty popular. They're all on our swap list today, but this was kind of a funny little. So I thought this was a great post. She actually gave very specific swaps. So you'll notice it here and actually in another one that I'm going to share with you, the brand Unreal, they are really good. So they taste really, really good and their ingredients are really good. They're not like if you had like good, better, and best, they're kind of in the better scenario. They're maybe not perfect. I think they do have sugar, like cane sugar in them, but they're not going to have like fake colorings. They're not going to have a lot of chemicals and everything else in them. So they're absolutely a better option. And they have some other brands here like Yum Earth for gummies and Smart Sweets. Smart Sweets is another brand that has some pretty cool stuff. And then Reese's. So Unreal. And then there's also, Sophie, help me remember this. Justin's is another brand that has like
Yeah.
yeah, Justin's has a
We
peanut.
we took the Unreals with us across the country. That was amazing.
Yeah.
And also, like, my favorite one, just to throw this out there, is Trader Joe's has Sun Butter Cups.
Oh,
And
yeah.
they're so good. They definitely have a bit of cane sugar in them. They're not perfect, but they definitely don't have like high fructose corn syrup, which is nice.
Yeah. Nice. So yeah, that's another thing that we want to avoid too. When we're thinking about the holidays, one of the biggest offenders is both things like high fructose corn syrups, and then you have like caramel colorings, you have fake chemicals, um, and then you just have like massive amounts of sugar, massive, massive, massive amounts of sugar. And then gluten too. So, I mean, there's a lot of things that kind of come with a Halloween candy package. So I want to give you some specific swaps. So instead of like a Hershey's bar, which we would think, oh, that's just chocolate, right? But take a minute, at some point to just read labels. They're not always what we think they are, but you could very easily upgrade to Who. I talk about Who all the time. I love Who. They taste amazing. They're super yummy. They have a bunch of different flavors. They use coconut sugar instead of cane sugar, and they basically have no bad ingredients, and most of their ingredients are organic. And one of the things I really like about them is they're sweet enough to calm the cravings and feel like you got a chocolate fix, but not so overly sweet that you need to eat half the bar. So this is a really, really great option in terms of not triggering the brain in that negative way. It's actually very, very helpful for that. So this is another example. If you love M&Ms, I look at things like M&Ms and Fruit Loops and I'm like, oh my gosh, there's so much food coloring. And I just think food coloring and I think brain problems and just not good. So lots of fake stuff in M&Ms. And if you really are an M&M person and love it, Unreal has, they have chocolate covered peanuts. They have an M&M kind. They have like so many different options and they're super, super, super good. Now, they do have, they think they do use regular sugar. So anything that has regular sugar in it, you are going to have to be careful for that brain trigger to see how much you desire more of it. But even a swap like this, you're probably going to have less of a trigger just because the level of burden is going to be less, if that makes sense. So Kit Kat, go ahead.
Quick question.
Yeah.
What is the advantage of coconut sugar? Is it just lower glycemic or?
Yes, it is. It's a lower glycemic index. And yeah, so I don't really notice, like I don't even know maybe if they're using less, for example, of like 1-to-1 ratio, they may be using less as well. But yeah, it is a lower glycemic index, which is good. So less impact on the blood sugar. And then like this, just as taking it as an example, they use a really high percent of cacao. So it's more of that sort of rich and it still tastes sweet, but it's not so overtly sweet and sugary that you then are like, oh, I have to have more of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So like just another example of like something that you could swap for like a Kit Kat. They have ones like this one has puffed quinoa in it. So it has a crunch in it, which is kind of fun and really delicious. Going backwards here. So the takeaways are really when you come into the holiday season, when you come into Halloween, when you're thinking about desserts, when you're thinking about sugar, you always want to plan ahead. I'm going to so-and-so's house. They don't eat the same way as I do. That's totally cool. I'll bring a pan of brownies. I'm going to bring some snacks to work. Thinking about what are your individual triggers, what situations are you going to be in, and if having something in front of you is a trigger, then don't keep things in your house. If you're going to buy a bunch of candy that maybe you don't want to eat, to trick or treat on Halloween, then just throw it away or give it away at the end. Thinking about, don't deprive your brain or your cravings, but think about ways that you can start swapping some ingredients or swapping some candy options. If you have a conventional treat, so let's say you do trick or treat and have this massive bowl of candy in front of you, plan ahead and don't give yourself unlimited access. Say, okay, I'll have one. I'm going to have it after dinner, and then I'm going to throw the rest away, because self-control only goes so far. So have a plan there. Balance the rest of your meals. So I'm going to make sure that I have fat and protein and minerals, because all of those things calm cravings. So I'm going to have a really balanced day. I'm going to have one Snickers bar because it's Halloween and I am getting these for the kids, and then I'm going to dump the rest. And tomorrow morning, I'm going to have a protein and fat and carbohydrate breakfast, and I'm going to put some Himalayan salt on it, and I'm going to be back where I was before the treat. The real issue comes when this becomes a habit and it becomes a trigger, and your brain is in control and you're not in control of your brain. So these types of things you can set into place to make sure that even if you do have a conventional treat, your brain isn't massively triggered. So every once in a while, as I gave an example earlier, we'll go out to dinner and we'll have a gluten-free dessert, and I'm sure it's packed with sugar. So I'm sure it's packed with sugar because that's how they make everything. And we'll have that. And, I don't have the same patterns that I did 15 years ago where, I would binge on things, or I would, have so much sugar intake. My sugar intake is so much down compared to that now it's like, okay, well, I can have a quote unquote conventional treat or sugar-filled treat or whatever. And it's not the end of the world, because in the home environment, it's very controlled. And so even if I have something sweet, it's not going to, trigger that process. Some other things to just kind of keep in mind is balancing your gut bugs. So sugar feeds bad bacteria, particularly yeast, and yeast are really known for massive sugar cravings. So if you do all the right things and you are eating a healthy diet and restricting your sugar intake and all this kind of stuff, but you just feel like your body is massively craving sugar and there's nothing you can do about it, and you do all the right things, you might want to consider your gut health. And we can always run a stool test to kind of see what's going on there. And then finally, I mentioned this several times throughout, keep treats at home that don't trick the brain, that are made with things like honey or dates, are filled with things that have protein and fat with them. So for example, I mentioned like almond butter brownies. So you have like this massive amount of almond butter, which is protein and fat. And then you have some honey in there or some maple syrup, and you have some cacao powder. And you just have these high quality ingredients that just behave differently in the body. And then slowly over time, you'll begin to see, unless you have some yeast overgrowth, but slowly over time, you'll begin to see that your cravings really diminish and your brain response changes. And then it doesn't have control over you anymore, and it doesn't become an issue. So I hope that was helpful. It wasn't like super intense or anything like that, but kind of like an overview of how we view sugar and are able to kind of, the biggest thing that I want people to take away is I never feel like I can't have something. If I want ice cream, I can have ice cream. If I want brownies, I can have brownies. And as soon as we get out of the restrictive mindset, but we are willing to make some shifts, I think it's so helpful, because then our biology responds to that and it works with us instead of us like trying to work against our biology. And anytime we eat like sugary things on a regular basis, or like these highly palatable, super refined, and like that's our primary brain input, we end up working against our biology, because that's how it like signals our body to want more of those things. Does that make sense? Cool.
I'm just gonna pop in. Sorry, it's a little loud here, but like it's interesting to see all of this now as like someone who's been through this on the other end. And like when I first was going through everything, I did like a completely sugar-free thing, and that was great because it reset my palate, like Kylie was talking about, but it wasn't sustainable long term. But it helped me at least get past that need for the Reese's. So that was like really helpful, but then it's like that's not sustainable. So I love that we come up with these swaps, because I think that's more sustainable in the long term.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think kind of looking at it like an addiction is really helpful too, because when we understand that, like, so if we keep triggering this addiction, then our brain is going to tell us that we want more of that thing. And then the swaps don't really help as much. So having sort of a clean break is really helpful to reset the palate. So then you can satisfy that craving without having like this massive fight with your brain. Well, it's not sweet enough, or you know what I mean? So like there is a period where I would say, ditching it and kind of resetting it can be really helpful if you're someone that really, really struggles. If you don't have massive sugar cravings and just start swapping some things and you notice that, okay, well, that really helps me and that works for me, either way is fine. It just kind of depends on like who you are and maybe what level you need. But yeah, I think it's definitely a process to kind of figure out what works for you. But I'm telling you, I used to sit down and eat like an entire box of Teddy Grahams. And I used to eat Oreos like all the time. And then I'd like wash it down with some Mountain Dew. Like it was like so different than how I eat now. It's crazy. But I do love the Hood chocolate, I will say. One square, 1 to 2, let's say. I like my 2 squares. Yeah.
That's fair.
Yeah.
Are there any pre-made or easy to find things to have around that are like maybe RX bars, or I know things are processed, but are there some better ideas for stuff to have around that is available as opposed to once in a while treat?
Well, are you talking about like snack bars, or are you talking about dessert? So like I really like Simple Mills, the brand. They have muffins, they have so like they'll have like chocolate cupcake mix, they have brownie mix, they have pancakes. And those are like super great because they're only a few ingredients, and they're the type of ingredients I would use if I was making that treat.
Yeah.
So I really, really like those. Yeah. Are you talking more like carry with you snack bars and stuff like that?
Yeah, potentially. I have like a Unreal dark chocolate with around coconut. Like I guess it's a Mounds
Yep.
version.
Yeah.
And I put in the freezer. So
Ooh,
it takes a lot longer so like one or maybe 2 kind of does it.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I will
Maybe
say,
it's not
so
good.
one of the things to kind of keep in mind too is, so the difference between the stuff that we're talking about, which is more of a high quality swap, it's things that we would make at home. So it's got almond flour and coconut sugar and honey and like these types of ingredients, versus just like a gluten-free swap. So I'll give you a really good example. I think the brand is called Goody Girls, and it's a what's that? Girl Scout. It's a Girl Scout replacement, a gluten-free Girl Scout replacement brand. And it's so good, but it's just like gluten-free and sugar and like massively processed. So that will trigger. I noticed that the other day. So I had like one of those. I was like, oh, I definitely want more. Definitely want more. I'm not gonna do it, but I definitely want more. Versus when we have these other things that don't trick our brain like that, it's a completely different, you're like, oh, okay, I'm good, I'm satisfied. So just to kind of like be aware, maybe experiment with some things, and then just mindfulness is really important too as you kind of go through this process, like what brands and what ingredients kind of do this for my body, because then we can become really aware of how we're feeling and find the stuff that works for us and that we can keep at home. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So Sophie, did you have snack bar? I've done like Thunderbird is really good. I really like that brand actually.
Raw, RAWR. I haven't tried it yet. It's actually from a recommendation of my friend, Dr. Beth Westy, and it has like 20 grams of plant-based protein in it. And it's just like basically a meal replacement bar if you're like on the run. So that was something that she's recently been posting a lot about, and I have it on my list to check it out.
Yeah. Okay. And sometimes, if you have like 5 minutes on the weekend or something, you can Google like DIY Lara bars. And that way you can use like organic dates and nuts and stuff like that. So if you care about, that level of of stuff with the ingredients. And they're actually really easy to make. You basically take a bunch of dates, you take a bunch of nuts, and like maybe a couple other ingredients that you want for that particular flavor. I mean, if you think about it, the one layer bar is literally like just cashews and dates. So it doesn't have to be complicated, but you can maybe copycat or Google different recipes. And it's literally, you just throw them all in food processor. You smush them down into a little bread pan and you stick them in the fridge and then you cut them and then you have like homemade layer bars. So they're actually very, very easy if that's the type of snack bar that you like. And it would probably be pretty easy too to add some protein to that. So if you wanted to throw in like a vanilla protein powder or a chocolate protein powder or something like that, you can probably Google that as well, see what would work.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. I always have these fun little tips. I'm like, oh, I should make those. I haven't done that in a long time. Yeah. They're really not hard. There's a bunch of stuff that if you have like a blender or a food processor and you have a couple minutes on the weekend, you can make a bunch of really good stuff.
Something you could batch make and put in the freezer and take out, it's really easy to make.
Yeah. Yeah. What's your go-to sweet, Carly? Like, what's your favorite thing?
I mean, brownies, that's a good one.
Yeah.
I keep like a bunch of the Simple Mills mixes because like having it be a mix is a good barrier. Like it's not instant gratification, but I could plant and then I put a bunch of nuts in it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
I love
yeah.
that.
But Reese's cups and stuff.
So another super easy one is if you have like little silicone molds, or you could probably even do this if you have like a mini cupcake thing. Literally, if you have like something like Enjoy Life chocolate chips and peanut butter, you just melt the chocolate chips. You put a little bit of peanut butter in there, you melt the chocolate on top of it, you freeze it, you pop it out, you have a little Reese's. Yeah.
Add a little salt on top, it would be delicious.
Yeah. So again, you're going to get a slightly different flavor, right? Because it's real ingredients and you don't have as much sugar. But it usually, if you're like, especially Enjoy Life does have sugar. There are other brands if you really want to get away from sugar. But again, like the whole goal isn't always to eliminate like 100%. It's to not get your brain so triggered by the sweetness that you can't stop eating stuff. And if you have like 100% peanut butter, it's just peanuts and salt. And then you have, the equivalent of like 10 chocolate chips melted on there or whatever it ends up being, you're probably going to be fine.
Yeah.
It tastes really good.
It's nutrient dense enough. And
yeah, well, then that even is like has a little bit of protein and fat in it, and you have a little bit of salt.
Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. All these little like things that only take a couple minutes, but I never do them anyway. I did do those though. They're really good. I have done them. I should do them again. If you're really lazy though, you could just take a spoon of peanut butter and then put the chocolate chips on it and eat it. So, yeah.
Also.
Win, win, win. All right. Well, I'm excited for the next couple weeks. I was going to ask about next week. We had talked about doing holiday planning, but we're actually going to talk about that a little bit in the November challenge, and you guys are going to have access to that. So we don't necessarily want to repeat. But one thought I had, and we definitely don't have to do this, but one thought I had was I just took a course called The Biology of Trauma, and I'm super interested in like how biology impacts or how trauma impacts our body and of course our health. So I would love to kind of share my takeaways from that if that's something that you guys would be interested in. I think that would be kind of a fun little training. Kind of pass.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Well, if you guys are watching the replay, let me know how you feel about that. Because I know at the beginning when we started this, people had said, hey, we'd like some more mindset and stress relief and stuff. So that would be kind of a cool way to incorporate that a little bit, talk how stress and trauma impacts our body and then our health. And then also I can give you a couple of different little tricks that I've learned as well. So it'll be fun.
Nice.
All right, cool. Well, I will look forward to that then next week. And let's start the 5 o'clock time next week. Does that work for you, Carly?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I can do that.
So we will start that next week and see how many people are able to join us based on that time. And I'll make that announcement then. Yay.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I'll see you next week.
All right. Let us know in the Facebook group if you need anything else.
Okay.
All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.